Crimson blood soaked the earth as he struggled for breath. He looked back at how far they had come, while searing beams rained absolute destruction. He clung to a sliver of hope, a prayer for victory. But in a heartbeat, a cold blade tore through his flesh, piercing his chest. Time froze. He stared in disbelief at the hollow void in his chest. His knees buckled as the brutal reality finally crashed down upon him. A fatal strike. He collapsed face first into the dirt. As his consciousness faded, he wondered if this was really how his legend would end. Helpless and fading, his blurring vision locked onto the winged nightmare above. Mankind's ultimate catastrophe. The harbinger of the end, staring right back. They call him the Liquidator. A celestial horror that erased an entire continent in a blink. To survive, humanity forged its final line of defense. A league of legends arose. Leading them was the Titan who once withstood a falling star. His shield unbroken against the heaven's wrath. They hailed him as the world's guardian, Brian Miller. Beside him stood a woman wielding the arcane might of 10,000 soldiers, the great sage, Bella Albright. Then there was the divine marksman. A man who felled a high-ranked dragon with but a single, god-slaying arrow. The divine archer, Jacob Bloomfield. And finally, the pinnacle of martial skill, the unrivaled sword saint, the legendary Amy White. Then, there were the leftovers, the support unit. Around them, the battlefield was already a silent graveyard of broken dreams and scattered corpses. Our protagonist, Gray Lee, lay dying. To the world he was just a disposable pawn, a mere foot soldier in a hopeless war. He watched the elites dance with death. The World Union Academy graduates were monsters of talent, existing on a plane he could never reach. The chasm between them was vast and cruel. With blinding speed, the elites unleashed a barrage of world-shaking techniques upon the Liquidator. A bitter realization bit at his heart. Was their presence even necessary? Meanwhile, Amy pressed the assault, a whirlwind of steel and fury. Her blade moved like a flash of lightning. Gray clenched his teeth. No amount of training could bridge the agonizing gap between their powers. Helpless tears blurred his vision. The Liquidator danced through the storm of blades until, finally, a single strike managed to draw blood. Amused by the scratch, the monster's eyes turned cold. With a casual flick, he unleashed a strike that skillfully tore through the elite's defenses. Blood sprayed the air as the legends fell. Gray's eyes widened in horror. The Liquidator was finally revealing his true, terrifying potential. The game was over. Gray watched in despair as the elites were erased in a single strike. Everything before was just a cruel joke. Victory was a lie. Drowning in his own blood, Gray clung to a sliver of consciousness, staring at the impossible wall of death. His heart was pierced, yet his soul refused to depart. Why was he still here? As his blood hit the ground, a voice echoed. "I've found you at last." A droplet of blood ignited into a divine radiance, forming a cryptic summons. A call from beyond the veil. "Awaken, bearer of hidden flame." Gray gasped, finding himself in a shadowy realm filled with ancient monoliths and chilling, silent stone structures. Is this the afterlife? The wasteland was empty, save for a looming silhouette. High above, a mysterious figure sat upon a grand, dark throne. Clad in midnight robes and crowned with horns, the entity radiated divine pressure. A golden seal shimmered beneath a translucent, mystical veil. With a face of cold stone, the being spoke. "You have not perished, child. Look closely, your mortal wounds have already vanished into nothing." A spectral vision appeared, showing his broken body. Gray looked up, his voice trembling as he asked, "Did you save me?" "I did nothing," the entity replied. "That miracle belongs to you alone." Gray's mind raced. He possessed a power even gods couldn't analyze. "Your potential defies logic," the being whispered. "But I promise you this. Your strength far surpasses the monster who slaughtered your kin. If you master it, victory is yours." Gray's eyes burned with hope. "Can I win?" The entity offered only a cryptic, mysterious silence. Hope was a dangerous thing, yet the creature rose. The Liquidator's existence was a stain that had to be erased from this world. He thrust his hand into Gray's chest. A blinding cerulean glow erupted, and an ancient magic circle burned into Gray's very skin. "I grant you my essence." Gray's eyes snapped open. Surrounded by death and blood, he reached out and grabbed his shattered blade. Abyss-like shadows swirled around the steel. This wasn't magic, it was a manifestation of his own soul, invisible to the unworthy naked eye. Gray understood. The Liquidator's gaze shifted, meeting the eyes of a dead man. In a blur, Gray lunged, his blade tasting blood. Shock flickered in the monster's eyes. A deep gash appeared on his chest. Gray felt the impact. The godlike enemy was finally bleeding. Gray hoisted a massive shadow-wreathed blade. Panicked and confused, the Liquidator scrambled to manifest an absolute defensive barrier around his body. As the dark flames cleared, Gray's face emerged from the smoke. Trembling, the Liquidator gasped. What kind of human are you?" Severed in two, the monster's blood sprayed like a morbid fountain. "To think a mere mortal would force me to use my all." Suddenly, a void black mist swallowed the light. Out stepped a masked figure, his presence flickering like a dark, haunting flame in the dark. The colossal dark sword ascended once more. The monster's confusion turned to terror as he desperately reinforced his shimmering protective shield. The aura settled, revealing Gray's cold, determined gaze. The Liquidator screamed, his voice cracking with questions that he simply could not answer. "Are you truly a man?" Gray's only answer was a lethal strike. Steel met barrier in a cataclysmic explosion of raw, unbridled power. The barrier shattered like glass. Gray's blade carved through flesh. "I wonder that myself," Gray whispered, stepping forward. The Liquidator's power was terrifying, but Gray was the one standing. Gasping for air, the monster hissed the promise of endless torture. Gray didn't wait. He struck, splashing yellow ichor across the ground. Monster, the creature roared, refusing to fall. Radiant light erupted as it gathered its final, world-ending energy. A massive magic circle filled the sky. Your time is up, it declared. Grey gripped his hilt, unyielding. Suddenly, the sun vanished, replaced by an unnatural night. But darkness or light, it didn't matter. The real battle was just beginning. Vanishing like a ghost, he aimed for the killing blow. But an invisible barrier shattered his hope, leaving him in shock. Liquidator sneered, declaring resistance useless. In this realm of eternal twilight, the laws of mortality simply do not apply. He urged Grey to abandon his struggle and witness the heavens. Grey gazed up, his eyes trembling with sudden terror. A shimmering light filled his pupils, expanding into a blinding glare. Magnificent, is it not? The Liquidator whispered in awe. Like a dying sun, the celestial mass plummeted. The earth screamed as the world-shattering impact consumed everything in fire. The cosmic strike left a hollow wasteland where Grey once stood. The Liquidator smiled, certain no soul could survive such devastation. He assumed the boy was erased from existence. Yet, a rift began to tear through the reality of the smoldering crater. A massive arcane seal ignited on the ground. A voice resonated through the air, sensing the immense energy converging. The sacrifice was sufficient for the journey. Fear flickered in Liquidator's eyes as he recognized the god of time, Kronos. Kronos reached out to the warrior. Having exhausted his divinity, he decided to cast Grey back through the tides of destiny. The past beckoned. As the Liquidator roared in fury, Kronos offered a final blessing to the boy. His strength fading fast. The celestial clock began its reverse count. At the final chime, the weight of the world was placed upon Grey's shoulders. Suddenly, Grey gasped for air, waking on a bed of soft grass. Dazed, he struggled to recognize his peaceful surroundings. Bathed in bright sunlight, he sat up in a lush, vibrant meadow. Turning his head, he sought any sign of the nightmare. It was Renado village, his home. Panic set in. This place had been reduced to ashes 15 long years ago. The truth hit him like a lightning bolt. Time regression, the impossible miracle, had actually transported him back to his youth. Shifting his weight, he noticed a familiar scar. This was the dark era when Belder's gang made his life a living hell. He swore never to crawl before bullies again. Yet, he remembered clearly how formidable those thugs were in his youth. He sighed. His battle with the Liquidator feeling like a fever dream. Now, he needed a plan to handle these pests. His instinct was to avoid conflict until he regained his peak strength. But as he walked, his past tormentors appeared. Leading the pack was the infamous brute, Belder. 3 lackeys flanked him, their eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Found you at last, Belder sneered. Grey tensed, watching as a heavy practice sword was tossed at his feet. Pick it up, the bully barked. When Grey hesitated, Belder growled, warning him not to play the fool today. A duel was demanded. Grey stood his ground, calmly stating that his lingering wounds made any sparring impossible. Grey politely declined the challenge. Belder only laughed, mocking him by pointing out the blade's harmless, rounded edge. Even a dull sword is still a heavy piece of iron, Grey countered. In the wrong hands, it is a weapon. Shut up. Belder roared, his patience snapping. He stepped closer, making it clear that refusal was not an option. If steel terrified him, then fists would suffice. Without warning, Belder lunged forward like a rabid animal. Grey blinked in disbelief. This was not a spa the man intended to pummel an unarmed opponent without any mercy. This was pure malice. Suddenly, the words of the village physician echoed in his mind, revealing a hidden truth. His path as a warrior had been stunted by a childhood trauma, a wound that never truly healed his spirit. This was the exact moment his life fell apart. With a graceful shift, he flowed past the incoming strike. Belder hissed in frustration. Grey watched the clumsy attack, amazed at how sluggish the bullies' movements appeared. Their movements became a rhythmic dance. He realized the truth, it was not that Belder was lacking speed. Rage boiled in Belder as he missed again. Grey zipped through the air, instantly invading the bully's personal space. It was Grey who had transcended his limits. The onlookers stood frozen, unable to process the boy's newfound agility. He moved like a master reborn. Ignoring their stares, he reached down to finally claim the discarded practice sword. His muscles were weak, but his mind was a treasury of 1,000 battles. Experience outweighed his physical youth. Belder launched a desperate ambush from the rear. Without looking, Grey parried the strike with effortless singular grace. A sharp counterstrike sent a groan through Belder's lips. Grey was stunned to see the bully fly backward. Was it wrong to crush a mere amateur? Perhaps, but this trash deserved every ounce of his suppressed wrath. A flurry of blows disarmed the bully instantly. Belder screamed in agony as the blunt iron found its mark. Blood splattered from Belder's mangled nose. Checking the safe, rounded tip, Grey stood over him like a vengeful god. Why the long face? It is just a toy, right? Grey smirked. The lackeys finally snapped out of their stupor. Grey welcomed the challenge with a cold gaze. Despite Belder's murderous orders, Grey systematically dismantled them until they were begging on their knees. Looking at the pathetic group, he finally asked if these losers truly belonged to the serious swordsmanship dojo. Belder nodded in agreement. One of the thugs boasted about their growth, claiming they'd become strong enough to skip training lately. Grey scoffed inwardly at their definition of strong. It seemed his expectations for this dojo were far too high. Still, he needed an entry point. Since the dojo only accepted referrals, these fools were his only ticket inside. Terrified, Belder begged him to ask another. If his master learned he'd lost to a kid, the punishment would be legendary. Grey leveled his blade at Belder's throat, suggesting a continuation of their spar. Cold sweat poured down the thug's face. The dojo is that way? Belder shrieked, sprinting off with surprising speed. His panicked cronies scrambled to keep up behind him. Reaching the city, Belder questioned Gray's motives. Gray revealed his goal. The dojo held a precious recommendation slot for the academy. Belder acknowledged the rumor. For Gray, that single slot was the only reason he was even bothering with this place. A lackey marveled at Gray's power, but the young swordsman sighed. If only his current strength was enough to face his destiny. He knew even the world's elite couldn't stop the Liquidator. Even channeling the power of Kronos hadn't left a single scratch. The summit of power felt unreachable, yet clues remained. Interrupting his thoughts, Belder finally pointed toward their destination. During that fleeting clash with the Liquidator, he'd felt it a momentary grasp over that terrifying dark energy. He'd relied on the Sword Saint's teachings. If he'd only trained harder, perhaps the outcome of that battle would have changed. This was why Kronos had sent him here. As they reached the dojo, the sharp voice of the instructor rang out. She glared, asking if these fools used her teachings to bully a civilian. A sharp click of her tongue signaled her disgust. This was Sarah, the dojo's master. Belder stammered, desperately claiming they were merely engaged in a friendly mock battle. Her response was a devastating strike that sent Belder flying into the wall. The others shivered as the impact echoed. She saw through his lies. If assaulting the unarmed was a mock battle, then her strike was just a friendly lesson too. Her blade touched his eye, ordering them to vanish forever. They were no longer worthy of being called her students. They fled in terror. Turning to Gray, Sarah offered a sincere apology for the trouble her pathetic former students had caused. Gray dismissed her concerns calmly. Grateful for his grace, Sarah transitioned to the real matter, the academy recommendation letter. She felt indebted, yet a recommendation required proof. To sign her name, she first had to witness Gray's true potential. She tossed him a wooden training sword. Take the first move, she challenged, waiting for him to unleash his spirit. Gray lunged forward. Sarah watched intently, noting his strikes were far more practical and refined than any ordinary boy his age. His movement smelled of 1,000 battlefields. When she finally countered, Gray deflected her strike with uncanny, veteran-like precision. No wonder Belder lost. His style was raw and self-taught, yet she caught glimpses of a strangely familiar high-level technique. Parts of his form mirrored elite academy arts. She wondered who could have possibly mentored a boy with such hidden depth. His edge was unpolished, but his raw talent was undeniable. He was a diamond in the rough, waiting to be sharpened. Time to end this. Their wooden blades collided in a violent burst of motion as they traded blow for rapid blow. He didn't falter once. What began as a simple test was now forcing Sarah to draw upon her own true strength. A cold shiver ran down her spine. It was fear. Gray's overwhelming pressure forced the master to take a step back. Dismissing it as a lucky swing, she spotted a gap in his guard. She lunged, aiming to finalize the duel instantly. Shock froze her heart. Sarah's sword had been sliced clean in half. Gray stood there, equally stunned by his own power. That familiar sensation had returned, the power was still within him. But such a divine gift always demanded a heavy price. Agony ripped through his veins, forcing him to his knees. Sarah rushed over, her face pale with concern and confusion. His mortal frame couldn't contain the surge. Despite his trembling legs, Gray forced himself up, masking the pain with a nod. Barely able to stand, he swore to never use that power recklessly again. He considered explaining the truth to Sarah. Sarah watched him warily. He decided against speaking. The truth of his power was too far-fetched for anyone to actually believe. He blamed it on adrenaline. But Sarah knew better. No mere wooden sword could ever shatter a master's blade like that. Sensing her gaze, Gray asked what was wrong. Sarah realized he intended to bury the mystery of that impossible strike. After a moment, she spoke of the recommendation. She could send him to the kingdom's most prestigious and elite institution. The Royal Academy of Swordsmanship was the goal. Yet she felt Gray's destiny lay far beyond such a narrow place. Gray's heart sank, fearing he wasn't strong enough. But Sarah's eyes sparked as she mentioned a much greater horizon. The World Union Academy, she declared. Gray froze. She wasn't telling him to lead the kingdom, she wanted him to lead the world. He belonged among legends. His mind raced, knowing that was the very birthplace of the Sword Saint and the world's greatest heroes. He wondered if a weakling like him truly belonged there. Sarah's cold reply cut deep. It was impossible. His frail body wasn't even fit to hold a sword. The Royal Academy might be fooled by cheap tricks, she warned, but the World Union Academy only accepts true monsters. She scoffed, asking how such a brittle frame could ever house real power. Gray knew she was right. He was stepping into a den of geniuses. With his current strength, he wouldn't even be a footnote in their history. Despair clouded his eyes, but Sarah demanded to know why he was folding. 9 months remained before the entrance exam. Though time was short, she demanded one thing from him: absolute, unwavering trust. She asked if he was prepared to endure 9 months of pure agony. Despite his fear, Gray steeled his resolve and accepted the challenge. He placed his life in her hands for the coming months. Seeing his conviction, Sarah's aura shifted instantly, catching the boy completely off guard. With a predatory grin, she welcomed him to his own personal hell. The seasons blurred as a cycle of brutal, relentless training began. Gray endured foul meals and endless sparring, refining his blade with every drop of sweat. He was a man possessed, racing against the clock. 8 months later, the transformation was undeniable. Gray's body was now a temple of muscle. Sarah realized she had nothing left to teach. She told him to walk tall and face the world, but Gray was baffled. Why leave when a full month still remained? She explained that a foreign battlefield is no place for a novice. He needed time to adapt to the academy's environment before the storm. She pressed travel funds and a month's worth of rations into his hands. Gray hesitated, feeling the weight of an early departure. It felt like an exile, but she brushed his worries aside. Then, Gray mentioned the rumors of an ogre nest lurking nearby. That caught her off balance. He noted the village's lack of defenses, but she played it cool, claiming it wasn't their concern. She promised the royal capital's knights would handle it. With a forced smile, she urged him to focus only on his exam. Gray saw through her facade immediately. No help was coming. In his past life, this was when his master was fated to die alone. He remembered the news of her lonely death against the ogre horde. Suppressing his emotions, he thanked her and prepared to leave. She smirked, wishing him luck, but the knight held a darker secret. Deep in the woods, grisly trophies hung from the trees as Sarah approached. Following a trail of scouting reports and fresh blood, she tracked the carnage back to an eerie, suffocating mountain den. A voice from above halted her advance. Looking up, she found Gray perched on a branch, greeting his master with a knowing smile. Shock washed over her. She demanded to know why he wasn't miles away on his path to the academy. Gray threw her own lie back at her, asking why she was here if the royal army was supposedly handling the nest. She claimed an emergency delayed the knights, forcing her to act alone. She was confident, having already gauged the enemy's numbers. An elite ogre led a pack of 50 monsters. While the boss was manageable, the sheer number of minions would be a bloody struggle. Gray knew the truth. These ogres possessed terrifying intelligence. Walking into that den alone was nothing short of a suicide mission. He was certain of the tragedy ahead. If she entered that cave alone, she would fall, and the village would follow. He had witnessed that Asheville future once before. This time, he looked her in the eye and refused to let her go alone. She tried to push him away, but Gray insisted. He claimed he needed the taste of real blood to truly finish his training. He asked if she feared he would be a burden. Sarah laughed, knowing all too well that his strength now rivaled her own. She hadn't beaten him in a spar for weeks, yet a monster's nest is far different from a controlled training ground. In a real hunt, one mistake means death. She argued that he lacked the experience to survive such a chaotic slaughter. Gray realized words wouldn't work. He gave her an ultimatum: either they fight together, or he'd knock her out and finish it alone. His stance was lethal, his gaze unwavering. Sarah finally relented, demanding only one thing: that they both return from this hell alive. With a shared vow of survival, they moved through the shadows, watching the massive colony beneath the cold moonlight. The terrain was a natural trap with no escape. It was a fortress of meat and bone, daring anyone to challenge its walls. These weren't mindless beasts, they were tacticians. Gray knew they had to be surgical to survive the night. The elite boss was hiding, likely deep within the central tent. Their only hope was to thin the herd before the king emerged. Sarah gave the signal, splitting the battlefield. She would carve through the left while Gray took the right. They struck like lightning. Before the first sentry could even growl, Sarah's blade had already claimed its head. As the severed head hit the dirt, the alarm echoed through the camp. In an instant, a tide of hungry monsters surged forward. Gray was a whirlwind of steel, harvesting lives with terrifying speed. Beside him, Sarah danced through the bloodbath until they reunited. Surrounded by a mountain of corpses, she marveled at his poise. It was impossible to believe this was his first real battle. But Gray didn't celebrate. Something felt wrong. These ogres were too easy, as if the true nightmare was still waiting. A pair of glowing red eyes suddenly ignited within the darkness of the central tent. The real hunt had just begun. Their predatory gaze locked onto him, chilling his blood. Without hesitation, he gripped her hand, shouting that they had to escape right now. Sarah's confusion turned to terror as he screamed for her to run. Sensing his sheer panic, they bolted, but a massive shadow suddenly soared overhead. An elite ogre crashed before them, shattering the earth and blocking their path. Sarah scoffed, tightening her grip at the sight of the beast. She mocked the boss for greeting them personally, but Gray's voice trembled. This wasn't the master. Suddenly, a thunderous roar erupted, forcing Sarah to cover her ears. In an instant, a frenzied swarm of ogres emerged from the shadows. Stunned by their numbers, she gasped, wondering what nightmare they had entered. Beyond the horde loomed a titan. Gray recognized it immediately. It was not just an elite, it was an Ogre General. The true sovereign of this nest. Trapped between the elite at the exit and the bloodthirsty horde, they were cornered. The general stood motionless, yet its presence felt like a mountain. Hearing it was an Ogre General, Sarah knew instantly. This was a battle they could never win alone. She eyed the elite, suggesting they break through the front to escape. She lunged with a fierce strike, but the beast deflected her blade easily. Her blade left a shallow gash, but the wound closed instantly. Gray warned her it was futile. The general's roar was boosting their strength and healing. The monsters were empowered by a dark frenzy, making even one a struggle. Yet, Gray refused to back down, continuing the desperate clash. He trusted her to protect his back, telling her to simply buy him time. Worried, she asked what kind of desperate plan he was concocting. He declared their only hope was to slay that general bastard. As an axe-wielding ogre parried his blade, Gray's irritation flared at every flanking attempt. The beast tried to disarm him before raising its massive axe for a strike. Gray remained hyper-focused, determined to carve through the wall of flesh. With a sickening crack, the ogre shattered his sword, proving his blade couldn't handle their power. He narrowly avoided death, leaping back just in time. He reached for his spear, knowing it wouldn't last long. Recognizing his dire situation, Sarah swiftly tossed her own extra sword to him. With a nod, he dual-wielded the blades, knowing this still wasn't enough to cull them. His focus narrowed solely on the general and the horde. He unleashed both blades, cutting through the front line in one fluid motion. In the chaos, a jagged claw grazed his cheek, drawing blood. He braced against the crushing axe blow, clicking his tongue as more monsters swarmed. He pushed back with everything, the pressure mounting by the second. The general's weapon began to glow, followed by a deafening howl. Gray flinched as the ogre's power surged, sending them into a new frenzy. He realized the beast was intelligent enough to read his plan. After another chilling roar, Gray's steel clashed violently against the ogre's heavy axe. Though forced back, he gritted his teeth and surged forward again. He cut down every monster in his path, knowing time was rapidly running out. Suddenly, an ogre tackled him, pinning him while another raised its axe. Gray reacted instantly, slashing the throat of the beast clinging to him. He realized they were using their bodies to dull his blades through sheer attrition. Then, a massive shadow loomed as an ogre leapt to strike. He blocked the heavy fist, but the force sent him flying. Gray coughed up blood as his entire body began to tremble from impact. Gasping for air, he looked at his shattered weapon. With only one blade left, facing the entire horde and their general seemed utterly impossible. Drawing on his memories from before his regression, Gray knew with cold certainty that this was a battle they could not win. Thinking quickly, he told Sarah to flee while he drew their fire. She gave a dry laugh, refusing to abandon him despite the onslaught. He demanded to know if she planned to die pointlessly, promising to follow. But with a heavy heart, she revealed running was no longer possible. Her expression shifted to one of pained resignation as she admitted she couldn't run. Her leg was badly mangled and bleeding out onto the earth. Gray turned pale, his options vanishing. He had returned to the past with one goal: to crush the liquidators, and he wouldn't fall here. He swung his blade, the shadow of death looming. As his last sword shattered, he refused to yield, desperately reaching for a forgotten power. He focused on reclaiming that strength to annihilate his foes. As the ogres closed in, he forced his mind to remember that ancient sensation. He reached deep for that past feeling, shutting his eyes tight as the final fragment of his broken steel danced through the air. His eyes snapped open, glowing with a predatory crimson light. Finally, he felt it. He unleashed a shadow blade, cleaving through the front line. A dark mist swirled around his blade, leaving Sarah bewildered. Despite his grim aura, Gray offered her a reassuring smile, whispering it was all right. With one devastating arc, he severed multiple heads. The general's weapon flared, but in a heartbeat, the beast was sliced down where it stood. Sarah watched in awe, then easily deflected a sneak attack. She realized the monsters had grown weak, no longer the unstoppable threats they once were. Without the general's empowerment, they were nothing but fodder. By the time the last ogre fell, the forest was shrouded in deep silent night. Gray apologized for ruining her blade, but she brushed it off, grateful to be alive. He gently returned the broken hilt to her. She opened her mouth to ask about his power, but Gray suddenly collapsed, falling face first. Panicked, she screamed his name into the darkness. Gray's soul drifted into a void of absolute darkness. He wondered where he was, seeing only a single, ominous door standing in the abyss. Eerie black flames suddenly consumed the chains binding the door. He recognized that aura immediately. It was the very power he had just awakened. He wondered if opening that gate would grant him true mastery, though the thought brought dread. As he stepped forward, a terrifying presence manifested behind him. He froze, his breath hitching in pure terror. Deep in his soul, he knew if he opened that door now, death would be his only reward. Gray's gaze pierced through the shadows. A mysterious voice echoed, confirming his path, before he suddenly snapped back to reality. Lungs burning and skin soaked in cold sweat, he gasped. Sarah jumped as his eyes flew open, his voice raspy as he questioned his location. Sarah explained he was safe in the infirmary, though 5 full days had passed in silence. With a trembling voice, she confessed her fear of losing him forever. 5 days? He had truly redlined his limits. Sarah shook her head, suggesting that pushing himself was a massive understatement for the madness he had pulled. Shifting focus, she urged him to move. Gray attempted to flex his dominant hand, but his right arm felt like leaden, unresponsive stone. Fear gripped him as he struggled to move it. If he could not wield a blade, he was finished. Then, he spotted a sinister, unnatural discoloration. It resembled a chaotic splash of pitch-black ink. Sarah was not surprised by the paralysis, but Gray wondered if she could even perceive the dark corruption staining his flesh. He admitted his sword arm was utterly powerless. Her expression darkened. She knew this wound would not mend through conventional means anytime soon. His bones were mere fragments, yet he felt no agony. Shocked, he listened as she revealed they had utilized a rare magic potion to stabilize him. He froze. Magic potions cost a small fortune. Sarah reassured him, explaining that the village chief himself had provided the precious elixir for his recovery. Why would the chief waste such wealth on a drifter? Sarah looked at him incredulously, reminding him that in their eyes, he was now their legendary savior. Before the confusion settled, the door swung open as the chief entered. Gray immediately offered his sincere gratitude for the life-saving medicine. The chief dismissed his thanks, his voice thick with emotion. They owed him everything for standing alone against a terrifying ogre general. That beast was a calamity that even elite regional troops could not dent, yet it had been hell-bent on reducing their village to ash and bone. Gripping Gray's hand, the chief confessed that without his intervention, every soul in the village would have been slaughtered that day. He insisted that without their bravery, this infirmary and its survivors would not exist. This very conversation would have been nothing but a silent graveyard. Gray tried to brush off the praise as hyperbole, but the chief's unwavering gaze spoke the absolute truth. Gray fell into deep contemplation. He eventually conceded. In his previous life, before his regression, this entire village had indeed been annihilated by that very same ogre assault. The chief offered to detail every life saved if Gray still doubted the monumental significance of his heroic sacrifice. Word had spread of Gray's ambition to take the academy entrance exams. Caught off guard, Gray could only manage a stunned mutter of "oh." Panic flared. He had slain the beast. It was a grueling 3-day hike. A horse could bridge the gap in one day, but his pockets were empty. Desperate, he asked to borrow a mount. Anticipating his need, the chief had already readied the village's finest stallion for his journey. With such speed, he'd arrive with time to spare. Sarah teased that if he had not awakened, they would have hauled his unconscious body there themselves. As she opened the door, blinding sunlight greeted him. Outside, a cheering crowd surrounded his horse, waving banners of gratitude and wishing their hero luck. Warm smiles filled the air. Gray's hand. The man explained it was a collection from every household. They knew the World Union Academy fees were a burden no hero should carry alone. Overwhelmed by their kindness, Gray thanked them, though he worried about returning if he failed. Sarah just gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. She reminded him that no other applicant had a general's head to their name. He nodded slowly. Sarah insisted that was plenty, and that he should not even consider using that power yet. He counted that the trials ahead were not child's play. Passing the elite academy with a single arm seemed nearly impossible. Sarah just smiled confidently. She declared that his sheer presence would command the promised him that victory was certain. Encouraged, he vowed to fulfill her expectations. Looking back at the thriving village which was once a charred ruin in his past life, his resolve hardened. The wheel of fate had shifted. The future was no longer written in stone, all thanks to his intervention. It was time to leave. Pushing through, his loyal steed, he gazed upon a majestic city rising from the center of a shimmering lake. He stood before the legendary World Union Academy. Inside the bustling arena, the announcer declared that the distribution of exam tickets was now commencing. Thousands of hopefuls were confined to the arena. Despite the massive crowd, only 20 elite slots were available for the entire year. Whispers spread that the passing quota fluctuated wildly. Some years 50 survived the cut, while other times, only a single genius remained. The host summoned Professor Ariel to the stage. She stepped forward with an icy grace, immediately beginning the mystical ticket distribution process. She commanded everyone to claim the documents manifesting before them. With a sharp snap of her fingers, the arena erupted in a blinding golden radiance. Ethereal papers materialized before each candidate. Gray looked down at his Examinee 513, fencing course. Around him, thousands did the same. Only their designated number and chosen path were visible. She confirmed this traditional method ensured total anonymity and fairness during the initial stage. With a smirk, she announced the Academy's core philosophy. Status, age, and nationality were irrelevant. Even names were with assigned courses based purely on their immediate appearance. She challenged anyone misclassified to step forward. The crowd was left speechless. How could she possibly categorize thousands of strangers correctly with just a single glance? Theories swirled had she investigated them all beforehand. Or was this a display of high-tier telepathy capable of peering into their very souls? A heavy silence fell, but no hands rose. The assignments were final. Then, the professor revealed the dreaded exam schedule. Tickets were checked with bated breath. Gray's heart sank. Day 1, 11A. The worst possible timing. He desperately needed time for his arm to mend. Professor Ariel's cold warning echoed. One shot. Be late, and you're finished. Gray gripped his lifeless arm, praying for a miracle to strike by tomorrow morning. Dawn broke, but the pain remained. With no choice left, he stepped toward the arena, arm still frozen in agony. He exhaled, purging his doubts. His left arm was solid, and his right had a spark of life. He would fight. He studied the examiner like, the first move is yours. The student lunged with a desperate roar. Brutal strikes rained down, but the examiner slipped through the gaps like smoke. Gripping his hilt with both hands, the boy swung only for the examiner to stop it with a casual palm. Hope vanished. The instructor countered with a single explosive blast. The boy was sent flying. Match concluded. Next. Retrieve your steel and leave. Gray watched, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. His number was called. He faced the monster who crushed giants using only one limb. Gray was ordered to strike first. Despite the suffocating despair, he steeled his resolve to give everything he had. He charged. Sarya's voice whispered in his soul. A sword isn't swung by arms, but by the body's entire momentum. Forget the broken limb. He channeled every ounce of his core strength, driving force through his remaining muscles. Steel whistled as the examiner ducked. Gray's nerves sizzled. This wasn't his usual rhythm, he was fighting a stranger's body. If strength was easy, training would be a lie. The examiner struck back, but then Gray's eyes widened in total confusion. The instructor's blade was slow. He parried. The man was a titan, but his technique was nothing compared to his master. If he relied on Sir Time's legendary to a blade. He shifted, testing the air, and suddenly, the path to victory became clear. The examiner wasn't invincible, he was sluggish. You'll pass, his master had promised. Their steel clashed, and Gray overpowered him. A spark of belief ignited. The dance of blades intensified. The examiner slipped away. The wall of pure power was still too high for him to shatter. Winning with a handicap was a nightmare. Yet as the duel dragged on, dangled the bait, waiting for the perfect heartbeat to draw his opponent in. There it was, the wide, arrogant swing. Gray shifted his weight, intentionally leaving a gap to lure the killing blow. The examiner swung for the finish, just as expected. But Gray vanished, reappearing like a shadow directly behind him. Behind the enemy, power means nothing. Victory was a hair's breadth away. Then, a sudden command. Halt! His blade kissed the examiner's back. Just 1 inch more. Was it over? It felt too soon to stop now. Time has expired, the official barked. Gray's breath hitched as the verdict echoed through the arena. A draw. It wasn't a win. His sword slipped from his numbed finger heavy. Without a victory, his future was a void. Next year, he whispered, praying his arm would heal by then. 1 week later, the Elite Academy Council gathered in secret. The exams were finally over. One professor slumped in his chair, completely drained of all his spirit. This collective observation is inefficient. An elder grumbled. Next year, we must divide this workload to save time. And risk losing a true genius? Another countered. We don't make things easy. We find the absolute best. The head sighed, silencing the room. The system isn't the topic. Give me your thoughts on the swordsman. The victors passed, a professor noted at 13. She gestured toward the screen, forcing them all to watch. That little guy? A professor scoffed. But as the footage played, the room went silent. He was actually winning. Relying solely on traps to defeat the examiner would only lead him toward a dead end. His technique was refined, yet his raw power was painfully lacking. He was clearly outmatched from the very start. The mustachioed professor dismissed him as worthless, and the board agreed. Only Professor Ariel remained frozen in silent disbelief. She was stunned that despite so many witnesses, not a single soul had realized the hidden truth. To her, gathering such blind fools was a total waste of time. The next morning, Gray clutched his examination ticket. The swordsmanship results were finally ready. With only 6 slots available, the air grew thick with suffocating nervous tension. Candidate number 5 was called first, their ticket igniting instantly. Next was candidate 217, marking their success. Numbers 432 and 615 followed. Finally, numbers 753 and 925 were announced. That was the end. Gray stood devastated as his number went uncalled while the victors crossed the bridge toward enrollment. Gray sank into despair across his heartbroken face. Suddenly, the Divine Eye special admission was announced. Moments later, Gray's ticket burst into magnificent, ethereal blue flames. The crowd gasped in shock. Gray stood paralyzed by confusion as bitter sneers began to ripple through the audience. Gray had instantly, with many claiming the academy had hit rock bottom. Gray was baffled by the accusations. Without any connections, he wondered if his master had intervened behind the scenes in secret. An elder rebuked the gossiping crowd, defending birth true world heroes. The skeptics weren't convinced, arguing its prestige was ancient history. They pointed mockingly at the failures of recent Divine Eye recruits. Names like Amy White and Jacob Bloomfield were mocked as failures. Gray knew the truth. Those very failures were the legends who battled the Liquidator. Now, Gray's name was finally etched alongside theirs. A booming and would commence in exactly 30 minutes. After donning their new uniforms, the freshmen were ordered to assemble at the Grand Plaza before the main office. The uniforms bore a sleek black patch engraved with the academy's crest. Gray looked absolutely dashing in his new attire. Early arrivals questioned if they were in the right location, as the vast plaza remained completely empty and bare. A frantic staff member rushed toward them, apologizing profusely for a sudden administrative mix-up regarding the venue. He requested they step back to clear space for the stairs. The confused students complied, wondering what he was planning. Perfect, he muttered, kneeling to the floor. As he touched the stone, a massive glowing magic circle erupted beneath them. The earth trembled and shifted. The students watched in utter awe as a magnificent structure rose directly from the ground. He apologized once more, inviting them to take their seats. The students stood there, completely mesmerized by the magical display. Teleportation magic, stunned that an entire building could be warped across space so easily. Gray took his seat, sensing the academy wanted to showcase its grandeur by holding the ceremony in such a view. Such extravagant magic was a flex of absolute power. Gray's eyes sparkled with excitement as the academy's true strength began to whisper in confusion. A nearby girl was shocked by his ignorance. Gray sheepishly admitted he'd spent his entire life focused solely on the sword. She kindly explained that the academy was a global nexus, gathering the most elite talents from every corner of the world. She pointed skyward, where massive aircraft and majestic dragons soared through the clouds. The sight left everyone breathless and questioning everything. Gray recognized the legendary magic airship, Strato Queen. Gray couldn't believe they'd deployed such a titan just for a simple entrance ceremony. The World Union Academy was shattering all of Gray's expectations. As the titan landed, elite students began to disembark in style. With everyone assembled, the ceremony commenced. After a long, droning speech from the headmaster, Gray's interest began to fade. To him, it felt like any other boring ceremony every step as he rose from his seat. Rumors claimed he'd crushed the examiner instantly. Some even whispered that his strength already rivaled that of the academy professors. This was Leonhard Appius. Guilty if he was permitted to speak his mind without restraint. Given the green light, he brazenly voiced a sharp complaint regarding the trash admitted through the Divine Eye special program. He challenged the special admit to reveal himself, demanding they surrender their uniform and vanish from the academy. Tension became suffocating. Gray was baffled by the hostility. Suddenly, he realized Leonhard was sitting right beside him, luckily unaware of his true identity. He hoped to remain invisible by staying in the shadows. But Professor Ariel noticed, smirking at this year's rowdy bunch of students. Leonhard's pride stung from the perceived disrespect. He barked a challenge, demanding she end the favoritism for backdoor recruits immediately. Silent at first, she vanished, reappearing to whisper a chilling question. Did he truly believe his strength surpassed that boy's power? The arena gasped at her blinding, unexpected speed. Caught off guard, Leonhard's jaw tightened as his composure began to crumble. He doubled down, challenging her motive. Amused by his fire, Ariel proposed a gamble that instantly piqued his curiosity. She wagered her career at confusion while Leonhard realized he was being baited into a duel. Ariel dismissed the idea as dull. If Gray unleashed his true power, she noted at the insult. Yet she merely offered the cold, hard facts. She proposed a monster hunt instead. After all, Leonhard was far better killing beasts than besting men in combat. Finding the terms, he listened as she laid out the rules of their deadly game. They would each battle a beast of her choosing. With every round, the monsters would grow more ferocious. The first to fail would lose everything. If Gray failed, Ariel would resign and the outcasts would be purged. If Leonhard fell, he would become her personal puppet. She threw down the gauntlet. Leonhardt hesitated, wary of some hidden trap despite his undeniable and overwhelming martial prowess. She named the first prey, an Ogre General. Then she smirked mockingly, asking if such a beast was far too easy for him. Shock rippled through the classroom. Yet Grey remained stoic. While Grey pondered her choice, Leonhardt's rage reached a was impossible for any human. Ariel countered calmly, revealing they wouldn't be facing the monster immediately. A single year was their deadline. Leonhardt scoffed, noting that if disaster-rank beasts were that easy, the world wouldn't be in chaos. He demanded a realistic target. As he caught his breath, the fog cleared, and her true devious scheme began to emerge. Suspecting she aimed for a stalemate of impossibilities, he stood firm. He refused to be a pawn in her rigged game. Ariel smirked Leonhardt. If Grey failed the hunt, she'd be fired and the outcasts would be exiled. She waited for his final answer. He stared as if she'd lost her mind. Despite the advantage, he felt cornered. Ariel sealed his silence as a binding agreement. He warned against the weakened prey. Ariel agreed with a cold smile, summoning a magical quill with a mere flick of her wrist. The binding contract was all magic. He reviewed the terms and signed. He questioned her faith in the boy, but she only offered a vague, cryptic smile. She retreated to her seat in silence. From her fading glory. Regardless, the die was cast, and Grey was trapped in the wager. A discrepancy nagged at him regarding the timeline. Ariel watched our main character in silence, her gaze heavy with unspoken secrets. Grey saw that. She pressed a finger to her lips, commanding his silence. He realized she was playing a dangerous, dirty game. The ceremony ended, and Grey headed toward his first lecture, Basic Magic. Classes began immediately, catching many off guard. In this academy, every single day was a battle for survival and mastery. The instructor opened with the fundamentals. The complex art of wielding raw power began with its simplest possible form. He lectured on ether, the hidden energy flowing through magic circuits. Grey listened intently as the board filled with complex diagrams. Worry faded as Grey recognized the material from his hellish boot camp. Things seemed easy until a massive problem emerged. Fate had placed him beside Leonhardt. He prayed the arrogant noble wouldn't calling out Grey's apparent lack of focus. Stunned to be spotted from the back row, Grey scrambled to offer a hasty apology to the stern, watchful instructor. His mastery of magic before the entire class. Grey countered politely, arguing that magic shouldn't be mandatory for those walking the specialized path of the sword. The professor disagreed, noting that true warriors must understand magic to survive on a battlefield shared with powerful sorcerers. Feeling the flow of mana was non-negotiable. Grey was startled. These words were an exact echo of his previous training. Sensing a pattern, he grew curious about the curriculum. He spoke up, asking if the lesson covered the ether bullet. The professor's brow arched in surprise. Grey confirmed off. Seizing the moment, the instructor proposed a match. Leonhardt stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with the confidence of a prodigy. He bragged about mastering both the sword and magic before enrollment. In his eyes, a serious duel against him would be certain death. But the professor remained completely unfazed. He claimed that despite the massive skill gap, these ether bullets were harmless. No one was going to die today. He had no intention of asking Leonhardt to hold back. Then, the professor dropped a bombshell. He revealed Grey was this year's legendary Divine Eye student. Every head snapped toward Grey. He realized he was in deep trouble. The professor wore a devilish grin as he exposed the truth. Leonhardt's gaze turned ice cold. He vowed to show Grey the harsh reality of the academy and where he truly stood. Leonhardt glared, ordering Grey to step forward. They stood nose to nose. The professor explained they would fire their ether bullets the moment he gave the signal. Grey had only a few days of training from boot camp. Though the professor promised it was safe, Grey knew he would not escape unscathed. The signal rang out. Leonhardt was dead. Leonhardt unleashed a faint, pale blue spark. But as Grey channeled his mana, a massive, brilliant azure orb manifested before him. The classroom froze in absolute swallowed Leonhardt's attack. Leonhardt let out a pathetic shriek. The professor lunged forward, desperately casting a barrier to shield his student. He thought he was safe, but the barrier instantly pulverized. Leonhardt was sent flying as a violent shockwave and blinding light filled the room. The blast screamed as he hit the floor hard. The professor rushed over. Hart staggered up, claiming he was fine. The professor exhaled in relief before slowly turning his gaze toward Grey. He realized that without that barrier, Leon powerful. He stared at Grey, demanding to know what happened. Grey was baffled. Leonhardt's spell felt so weak it did not even seem like the same magic. He wondered if the magic from the subjugation squad was fundamentally different from what the academy taught. He asked if he had used the wrong spell. The professor shook his head. There, completely lost by the term. The professor admitted even masters struggled with such force. Yet Grey had refined it into a perfect spell with ease. He declared that no one else in the academy could perform such a feat. Whispers erupted as they witnessed such destructive power. Some realized why the Divine Eye admission existed. Others whispered that Grey belonged in the magic course from day one. But Grey felt uneasy. Every spell he had learned at the subjugation boot camp was cast this way. Back then, he was considered the least talented. He asked if the professor was joking, believing anyone could do this with practice. The professor roared with laughter. Grey watched in confusion as the man cackled, before suddenly lunging forward to grab Grey's shoulders. Getting right in his face, he was hopeless at magic. The professor looked at him like he had told a hilarious joke. He could not believe someone who mastered ether compression thought they lacked talent. He proclaimed Grey a once-in-a-generation genius, a true prodigy that would stun the entire academy. He insisted that whoever called Grey talentless was a total fool. He asked one last time if Grey was truly sure about declining. This professor was famous for never giving praise. The students were speechless, unable to process the very essence of magic. Gray laughed nervously as a memory surfaced. He finally remembered where or life force existed. Casting was a nightmare back then. They had to compress ether constantly, hoping it would accidentally fuse with their inner life force. A woman with golden eyes and azure hair had once called that primitive method completely laughable. Returning to the present, Gray asked about Odd. The professor's blank stare confirmed everything he suspected. This world was again about the transfer. Gray bowed deeply in apology. He explained his heart belonged to the sword, and he had to refuse the offer. The professor accepted, but left the door, promising he would never scold him again for being bored or even leaving class early. He knew these basic lectures were beneath someone of Gray's caliber. The students were floored by Professor Carlos intently, clutching his chest in silence. His cheeks flushed as he gazed at Gray with pure adoration, calling him Lord Gray. A shiver ran down Gray's spine. Later that afternoon, a mysterious letter arrived from Professor Ariel, requesting Gray's presence immediately after class. An abrupt summons caught him off guard. Was Professor Carlos responsible? He suspected she might force a transfer to the magic course. Reaching her office, he hesitated. Before his knuckles could even brush the moment he entered, a sharp blade lunged at his throat. With lightning reflexes, he parried the strike, leaving the attacker paralyzed with disbelief. Gray's body had moved on pure instinct. Who would dare ambush him here? Looking closer, his breath hitched as he recognized her face. A flicker of memory sparked. Suddenly, a voice praised his performance. It was Professor Ariel, confirming her truly held back. He needed to know if Ariel had ordered her to show mercy. Her technique was flawless, yet he had disarmed her instantly. Hearing her name, Gray realized the truth. This was the legendary Bella Albright. She was a renowned grand sorceress. Ariel scoffed at the men's doubts, unable to believe they were questioning such raw, obvious talent. She warned them that if they couldn't see Bella's true effort, they should resign. The professors quickly laughed it off as a joke. The loser handed over the coins. Bewildered, Gray demanded to know what kind of madness was happening in this room. Ariel explained they had bet on his survival against Bella's ambush. Thanks to his reflexes, she had just won a small fortune. His eyes nearly popped at the sight of the gold coin. It was worth a fortune. The other professors sighed in defeated agreement. They noticed Gray's subtle movements. He deliberately shielded his dormant arm, as if protecting a deep-seated injury from everyone's sight. One professor sensed it wasn't a physical tear, but something etched deeper. A standard wound would never cause such specialized hesitation. Gray marveled at their sharp insight. They simply laughed. They wouldn't be elite academy professors if they missed such obvious details. Professor Ariel had already sensed his secret during the entrance exam. She coldly dismissed the others, her point now proven. She claimed him as her own student, refusing to let go. The others admitted his potential, though his unhealed wound remained a concern. Keep that burden in mind, they warned solemnly before vanishing into the shadows of the hallway. With the nuisances gone, Ariel turned to the real topic, magic. Over tea, she mentioned his use of super compressed ether in class. He was stunned. She already knew. Ariel revealed that Professor Carlos had practically begged to steal him for the magic department. Naturally, she refused. To her, he was born for the sword, not sorcery. Gray didn't expect such a firm assessment from her. She noted he lacked the signs of magic practice. Gray was speechless. Her eyes saw through every single one of his secrets. Realizing honesty was his only option, he admitted the truth. Intrigued, she promised a rich reward if he revealed his secret trick. Her desperation was for Bella's sake. The girl once hailed as a potential grand sorceress, now struggling to find her path. Bella was a theoretical genius, yet a failure at manifestation. For some reason, the ether compression technique remained completely beyond her grasp. Without it, creating super compressed ether was impossible. Gray recalled rumors of Bella being a late bloomer in his past. Ariel noted that when Gray performed the feat, he didn't appear to be compressing ether at all. A revolutionary method seemed likely. If a shortcut existed, Bella could avoid being sent to the terrifying Varian Bradley. Gray's blood ran cold at that name. Ariel saw his reaction. Varian's infamy was absolute. His name was synonymous with cruelty and forbidden, dark magical research. His twisted human experiments had claimed countless lives, causing magical catastrophes that wiped out entire cities without a shred of remorse. He was the most heinous magic criminal in history. Gray's era. If Bella failed to master compression by year-end, she'd be handed over to Varian for a corrective and dangerous surgical procedure. Gray was horrified. Ariel agreed, knowing the surgery was a thin veil for gruesome human experimentation on a young, innocent genius. Though suppressed by the elite, rumors whispered of those who died on his table or returned with their souls utterly broken. Trembling, Bella confessed her terror. Yet, expulsion was the only other path if she couldn't master the ether technique in time. Ariel wished she'd simply quit rather than be mutilated. Gray realized the magic he possessed wasn't past helplessness against the cruel liquidators. Why protect a history that leads to a hellish future? He decided that changing this world was a far better choice. He agreed to help, promising to teach her the secret at dusk. He began sketching complex futuristic runes on the board. He laid out his forbidden knowledge, demanding a solemn oath of secrecy. Ariel gave him her word without a second's hesitation. They forged a lethal magic contract, ensuring death for any betrayer. He then asked for their thoughts on his future grade theory. Ariel was shaken to her core. The concept of OD was revolutionary. Bella found the complex system incredibly elegant and perfectly structured. To her, it felt like a transmission from a distant future. This single explanation had just pushed magic history forward by a century. Gray smirked internally. After all, he was merely repeating the lecture she would give him 10 years from now. In this primitive era, such knowledge was divine. Ariel stood silent, overwhelmed by information that defied the current laws of magic. Doubts lingered as she questioned Bella about his claims. Bella nodded, sensing the undeniable truth within his theory. The logic was flawless, aligned, a direct field test. The moment of truth arrived. If Gray's words held weight, the formula would ignite. She handed over the transcript. Gray scanned the symbols in confusion. Suddenly, her staff blazed with brilliance, channeling her raw power through his new theory. He recalled the legends Bella's true, unbridled might was whispered to be capable of reducing whole cities to ash. But her weakness was control or lack thereof. Before he could even brace himself, an explosive surge of mana erupted. Confusion flickered in Bella's eyes as her mana spiraled out of bounds, a pillar of pure light piercing the heavens. The sheer scale of her output was unprecedented. A terrifying godlike pressure weighed down on everyone present. Death brushed past Grey. Only her last-second mastery prevented disaster. She had truly snatched his life back from the abyss. A beam of joy crossed Bella's face. Not only had she succeeded, she had finally tamed the wild storm. She playfully wove her mana into a majestic dragon, but the drain was total. Her ether spent, she collapsed instantly. Gray's heart raced, but Ariel remained calm. The sleeping girl, the professor whispered, simply marvelous. Such grand-scale sorcery mastered in mere minutes. Yet, even in her dreams, Bella murmured that the brilliance wasn't hers. The secret lay in the theory, the key to super-compressed ether. Gray smiled inwardly. After all, it was his gift to her. Ariel breathed easy. With super-compressed ether unlocked, the dangerous surgery was no longer necessary for Bella's survival. She would halt Bradley's plans immediately. Above all, she rejoiced that Bella's delicate magical control remained perfectly intact. Gray questioned the cost. Ariel explained that Barian surgery boosts power, but at the devastating price of one's fine control. The procedure remained shrouded in mystery, a forbidden art designed to forcibly shatter a mage's natural limiters. Gray's mind flashed back. Was this surgery the reason the legendary sorceress of his past life lost her sanity? Ariel turned to Gray, acknowledging that his wisdom was the catalyst for Bella mastering super-compressed ether. The first debt was cleared. Now, it was finally time for the professor to honor her side of the bargain. She focused her intent on his mangled arm. As her mana surged, ethereal butterflies began to dance around them. With a gentle touch, the swarm intensified, weaving a cocoon of restorative light. How does it feel? She whispered. He slowly closed his fist. To his utter shock, his fingers obeyed. Thank you, he breathed, voice trembling. Potions had failed him, yet this worked. She scoffed, warning him never to compare her divine restoration to common elixirs. Was his old agility truly back? There is only one way to know, she challenged. Draw your blade. Gray stepped back, the steel whistling through the air. He frowned, repeating the motion as if searching for something lost. A strange friction remained. The future wounded soul. Gray froze. She met his gaze, confirming his darkest fears. Modern scholars may deny the soul's existence, but Ariel knew better. To her, the spirit was undeniable. Her mystical eyes saw what others could not. His fractured soul was finally beginning its slow journey toward healing. Patience was key, overexertion would only lead to ruin. Gray hesitated, wondering if he should abandon his sword training entirely. Normal exercise was fine. She was more intrigued what forbidden technique could possibly inflict damage upon a swordsman's very soul. Gray remained silent. She continued, noting that only legendary styles could channel the spirit itself into a blade's edge. She spoke of Amy White, the sword saint. Gray's heart skipped. Why was she mentioning that name in this era? They shouldn't have met yet in this timeline. Sensing his stunned silence, Ariel tilted her head, questioning her assumption. His movements were a mirror of Amy's. She suspected he was a secret disciple of the famed sword saint. Yet, a subtle refinement set him apart. His mastery suggested a teacher even more formidable than Amy herself. In a few years, perhaps Amy would reach that level. But for now, Gray deflected. He claimed his skills were merely the result of a local dojo's training. The ice was getting thin. He needed to pivot immediately before his secrets were laid bare under her gaze. Can a mere blade truly shatter a soul? He pressed for answers. Her response was a chilling. No common strike could have felled an Ogre General in a single, devastating stroke. Total destruction is the only way if he won't submit. She called it extreme, yet couldn't deny the looming danger he posed. Vian's twisted experiments continued regardless. Gray demanded to know the professor's true connection to this madness. Her confusion turned to a chilling revelation. The Liquidator was the very monstrosity he sought to summon. Gray was stunned. A man-made horror? Gray recalled the Academy's suspicious behavior. They knew exactly where the beast would manifest. The realization hit like a lightning bolt. The Academy was complicit. He agreed. But fate was cruel. Being equal in rank, Ariel lacked the authority to shut down a fellow professor's project. The higher-ups turned a deaf ear to her pleas. Gray's eyes narrowed. Just who are these faceless puppet masters? Forbidden secrets. Without a direct order from the top, the experiment would grind on, unstoppable and unchecked. No names, only shadows. Gray realized the Academy's corruption ran deep. But if he is a criminal, the game changes entirely. In his past life, Vian's forbidden research slaughtered tens of thousands. Gray knew exactly where the butcher hid. He'd catch Vian red-handed in his secret lair. But Ariel shook her head. Justice wasn't that simple. It would be the ones behind bars. Without undeniable proof, they were powerless. Do you have evidence? She pressed. Gray fell into a heavy silence. The conversation died there. Gray saw the truth. She knew the peril, but her hands were shackled by bureaucracy. He nodded in grim understanding. Suddenly, she shifted focus. Do you wish to master the volatile power within you? His heart raced. Could she truly teach him? There is a master of unknown forces within these walls, she replied. Heathcote Longmorrow. Gray's soul surged with joy. Mastering this power was the sole reason he entered this academy. A lead, found so quickly. But at dawn, Heathcote did not greet him with words. He launched a sudden, brutal attack. Lessons from a legend. Yet, confusion mounted as they sprinted through the dense forest. Why were they just running? Heathcote sensed his wandering mind. If you have breath to think, you have strength to run. Move your legs, boy. Run until your very bones scream in agony. Push past your absolute limit. Listen well. Only when your flesh is spent will the true power of your soul finally awaken. No swords until your stamina is 0. Yes, sir. Gray gritted his teeth, trusting the legend's unorthodox methods. Yet, doubt lingered. While he ran laps, Vian was busy summoning the Arbiter. Time was bleeding away. Is this really enough? Later, Gray stood before Ariel, returning to his limbs though. Ariel chuckled. It sounded just like Heathcote. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed. A messenger delivered a letter. As Ariel read, her face twisted into a mask of pure terror. What happened? The letter reported Bella's success with supercomplicated twist. A mimicry of power. Close inspection proved she had not actually compressed it. It was a clever, dangerous deception. The achievement was void. The contract held, and the surgery was back on. Signed. Vian Bradley. That snake. Insanity. Gray roared. Ariel realized Vian was obsessed, hell-bent on cutting her open regardless of the truth. Can she refuse? The contract is an iron cage, Ariel whispered. Expulsion or the knife, those are her only choices. I need your help. Lead me to his lab. Exposing his crimes is the only way to shatter that contract. Gray's smirk returned. No proof? No problem. We were on him. I should have trusted you from the start. Your eyes never lied to me, Gray. Not even once. Lead the way. Together, we will drag Vian's sins into the searing light of justice. The laboratory is hidden in the Torowell Peaks. Ariel remembered his authorized mountain facility, the perfect cover. Illegal horrors in a sanctioned lab, the ultimate shadow. Isolation is his ally. No professor would dare trespass on another's research grounds. He is safe. For now. But with proof, the law won't matter. Suddenly, a knock. Bella entered, her f. Bella's voice trembled. Are you really going to face that monster for me? Professor Ariel watched with an amused smirk. She declared her own strength was more than enough, but Bella's eyes remained fixed on Gray. Gray refused to stay behind, insisting he accompany the professor. Bella stood firm, claiming this burden was hers to carry alone. Ariel urged them to reconsider. They were preparing to strike against an elite member of the Academy's high faculty. Worse yet, he was a total psychopath notorious for conducting forbidden and lethal experiments on human subjects. Falling into his hands meant a fate where danger was exactly why she shouldn't face him without support. If he unleashed the same devastating power that crushed the Ogre General, he could certainly tip the scales in her favor. He reminded her that if she vanished, his status as a Divine Eye student would be revoked instantly. The logic made her hesitate. Gray stood his ground, demanding the right to forge his own destiny tonight. The professor sighed, seeing the unwavering fire in their eyes. She knew they'd follow her even if she forbade it. She finally relented on one absolute condition. They must prioritize their own survival above all else, no matter what. She demanded their word of honor. With grim determination, they perimeter, confirming they had reached the target. Bella trusted her companions. Yet a shadow of doubt remained. Could they really escape this den of evil unscathed? Ariel calculated their chances. Varian was supposed to be attending the Magic Society conference, leaving the facility vulnerable. Suspecting the main entrance was rigged with deadly traps, Ariel decided they would breach the lab through the side wall instead. Bella worried about the destruction, but Ariel reminded her that infiltrating a sanctioned academy lab was already a capital crime. The stakes were set. Ariel offered them one last chance to turn back. But Bella questioned why Ariel would risk her entire career for a mere student like her. Gray cut in, explaining that stopping this madness wasn't just for her. It was stared at him, chilled by the weight of his words. Ariel chuckled at Gray's dramatic flair, yet she couldn't deny that Varian's darkness had to be purged tonight. She told Bella to hold her head high. They weren't throwing their lives away. They were fighting for what was right. The assault began. With a flick of her wrist, the professor summoned a magnificent array of shimmering magic circles. A thunderous explosion leveled the laboratory wall. Gray watched in awe, realizing Ariel's power was even more terrifying than rumored. As the smoke cleared, they stepped into the breach. Gray's breath caught as he witnessed the nightmare inside. They stood in a literal dungeon. Chained to the walls were skeletal victims, their bodies reduced to skin and bone. Many were mutilated, bleeding from horrific wounds. The sheer brutality of the scene made Ariel's blood boil with rage. There was no longer a need to search for proof. The walls themselves screamed of Varian's unforgivable atrocity. Bella whispered in terror, asking what their next move should be. Their mission was to gather intel, but the sight of the suffering prisoners made her wonder if they should play the hero. Gray urged them to move fast. If Varian returned now, this laboratory would become their shared grave. Suddenly, a cold voice echoed behind them, mocking their presence. Ariel spun around, her heart sinking at the sound. It was Varian. He had used a magical double to deceive the conference while he remained here to guard his secrets. A dark experiment required his personal attention. Ariel glared at him, demanding to know the depth of his depravity. He smirked, mentioning he pointed toward the row of hanging corpses, but his gaze shifted to the trio with a sickening new hunger. He craved subjects with high magical potential. A wave of murderous intent washed over them, chilling their very souls. He didn't care how they found him. He knew they had come in secret, meaning no one would hear them scream. If they vanished tonight, no one would suspect a thing. Ariel realized with horror that they were his next lab rats. Varian promised their deaths would advance the limits of magic itself. He prepared to strike, but a sudden fireball erupted. Bella had attacked first, shocking even Ariel. As smoke cleared, Varian stood unscathed and amused. He praised Bella's raw talent, eyeing the Divine Eye recruits with greed. He mocked her failed assassination, but Bella stood up Professor Fall alone. Professor Ariel's voice was firm. She reminded that magic was sinister, bypassing all standard defenses. She stepped forward, buying them precious seconds. The barrier shattered mid-sentence. Panic gripped the professor, but Bella stood firm with a smile. Flames. Bella shielded them, claiming his power was merely lackluster. It only took a specific counterspell. Varian's eyes widened. How could anyone else know that secret? He demanded answers. Bella smirked, crediting a new theory that made the spell child's play. Rage consumed him. He roared for the traitor's name, his mind spiraling in disbelief. Reveal him, and I'll grant you a swift death. Bella only teased him further. With a playful smile, she whispered it was a secret from a mere swordsmanship student. Gray had connected with fury at her mocking response. He crushed a crimson crystal. Wailing souls erupted, threatening to burn them all alive. Darkness surged toward them. Potent magic engulfed the area, leaving Gray fearing for Bella's safety. The barrier held, but her mana was fading. Varian calculated she had 60 seconds left. Bella shouted for the professor to strike. She would handle the defense alone. Ariel's eyes glowed, spotting a weakness in the flames. She channeled her mana outward. Power surged as she unleashed lightning. The bolts flew like razor-sharp blades. The sparks faded. Varian laughed, mocking their futile struggle against his overwhelming might. They were cornered. Gray knew Ariel's offense was the weakest among the academy staff. The flames devoured her spells. Bella gasped, "Leave it to him." Bella doubted his range, but Gray's resolve was absolute. His sword would reach him. Professor Ariel hesitated. Using that power again could cost him